Tonight, we are talking with Michael Ching, composer and conductor, most famous for his a cappella adaptation of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. But in Savannah, he is most famous for Alice Riley, A Savannah Ghost Story, an opera about the early days of the colony of Savannah. Welcome, Michael Ching.
Hi, Dave. Glad to be here.
You got involved in opera very early in your career.
Yes, I did. I actually didn't hear a full-length opera until I was in college, but I really decided that I wanted to work in opera, and so I studied with an opera teacher in college, an opera composer by the name of Robert Ward, who wrote an opera called The Crucible that really is still quite popular. My senior project at Duke was to write a one-act opera that we performed the summer after I graduated. And then I went to the Houston Opera Studio training program instead of going to composition graduate school. So instead of perfecting my string quartet, I got to work with Carlisle Floyd and study what makes opera tick. And he actually spent the whole year with me working on outlines for librettos. And it was very, very humbling experience to realize that I had a lot more to learn. And so what I really did after that was to actually go into the opera field. I first started at the Florida Grand Opera back in the day when singers like Placido Domingo and Luciano Pavarotti were headlining the shows there, and then decided that I really wanted to work in an opera at companies that were a bit smaller and more collaborative. So I went to the Virginia Opera and eventually landed at Opera Memphis, where I actually was the artistic and general director for 18 years. Finally got a chance to retire from that and have been composing and with a little bit of conducting and songwriting ever since then.
During your career as an opera administrator, did you also have a chance to write?
Yes, but the writing was a whole lot slower. When you're busy running an opera company and worrying about the finances and building a new rehearsal facility and all that sort of stuff and doing your conducting and maybe a little bit of guest conducting, it really cut down on my productivity. I did write some, but now that I am not running an opera company, I feel like I can spend a lot more time writing. And in the last 20 years or so, I discovered that I'm actually a pretty good librettist, too. So quite often, I'm the composer and the librettist. For example, in the project in Savannah, I'm both the composer and librettist for Alice Riley and the upcoming Anna Hunter.
What are the major challenges of writing an opera?
Where do I start? I think that the major challenge of writing an opera is getting the story right and the characters right and causing the story and characters to work to your compositional strengths. If you happen to be big on orchestration or color or intimate psychological characterization, then you have to make sure that the libretto and story works for you. And in my particular case, I would say, since I like to write fairly conservative, tuneful pieces, whether it's in a sad context, a tragic context, or a happy context, I need to make sure that I have opportunities to write melodically. There are certainly specific things that Savannah Voice Festival wanted as well. As you know, Dave, the Savannah Voice Festival is mostly a place to develop younger talent, and so we want to make sure that the new pieces that are created were suitable for that younger talent. And that, for example, is one of the reasons why I managed to convince Maria Zuvas to come out of retirement to sing the title role in the upcoming Anna Hunter, because during the period of this opera in the 50s and beyond, Anna Hunter was already in her 50s and 60s, so she wasn't a young person at the time of the story. And so I wanted to have a slightly more mature singer to sing that role. In any case, I would say that most of the time an opera will stand or fall, strangely enough, on whether its storyline and libretto is compelling enough.
When you write the music for an opera, you have to be much more descriptive, much more programmatic than the abstract. Well, some operas actually are written very abstractly, the music. But In your case, because you use much more of a tonal, almost romantic feel to the opera, you write very programmatically. It follows the themes and the actions in the opera versus being abstract. Is that a challenge?
No, actually, it's the only way I can work. I started out, certainly in high school and some in college, working on more abstract music, and that abstract music actually means less and less to me as the older I get, and the older I get, the more I like my music with words. And that's not quite the scope of this program, but I know you're interested in songwriting as well. And so I think of myself as an opera composer who is very influenced by songwriting. And so I don't like to write abstract instrumental music anymore. I've written very little instrumental music in the last 20 years. For me, actually having what you call programmatic situations is actually better for me. For example, when you say music of the 50s and 40s, that there's a certain kind of sonic quality that maybe will occur to you if I say that. In the case of Anna Hunter, I can reference those kinds of musical styles in the piece, and it actually gives me a place to hang my hat. It gives me a point of reference for writing the piece.
Well, when people talk about opera, one of the first things I say is there ain't going to be no more Aidas.
The Metropolitan Opera and a few large institutions are certainly still commissioning and developing operas that are on a pretty large scale. But what has happened more recently is that the smaller scale things have really come into their own and have gotten a lot of traction. And I think what happened is that the $1 million opera company that used to do 4 productions a year, maybe they can only afford to do 3 productions a year, and maybe one of those needs to be a smaller chamber opera. And so an opera like Speed Dating or even Alice Riley, those can be more accessible and more popular from a programmatic standpoint. I think all things being equal, if money were no issue, I'm sure that a lot of the standard repertoire opera companies would love to do a season that was Aida, Turandot, Bohème, and The Marriage of Figaro. But those kinds of seasons are just unaffordable now.
And at the same time, probably getting a new opera that is on the same scale.
Yeah, and the thing about doing a new opera is that most of the time when people commission a new opera, they don't really want to undergo $500,000 worth of risk in terms of the production cost. And so they don't want you to write an Aida. It's risky enough as it is to do something new. And then if you compound it with massive production costs, whether it's a big orchestra or a big chorus or what have you, that is something that really makes it pretty tough and risky. And in fact, even in Verdi's day, only Verdi got to write Aida.
That's true. What do you see as the real advantage of a chamber opera?
Frankly, they're easier to perform, and the intimacy, just like with a string quartet or a piano trio, that intimacy allows for a greater degree of expression, a greater degree of receptivity on the audience's part. And when you can see something really up close, you're much likely, for example, to be able to understand the words when somebody is 20 feet or 30 feet away from you than if you're in the back row of a huge 2,000-seat hall. And so that intimacy really lends communication advantage to the composer and the librettist.
I think of chamber opera as almost like operatic cabaret.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it. It's intimate and in your face.
2, 3, maybe 4 primary players, accompanied by maybe even just a piano.
Yeah, Savannah Voice Festival has done a really good job of making that work.
And we have some nice intimate sites, too, where it comes off very well.
Yes. Savannah has all sorts of fun little spaces.
Recently, many of your operas have been historically oriented. Let me start off with Core of Discovery.
That was a project that I did a few years ago for the University of Missouri, and that was related to the commemoration of the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark expedition, which was, I guess, 1804 to 1806. And so at that period of time, there were a lot of activities going on, especially in states that had a connection to Lewis and Clark. along the trail, it's something that people were quite interested in. These two pieces that I've written for Savannah Voice Fest are both based on historical subjects. Now, if you research Alice Riley, there's maybe 200 or 300 words actually written about her in the annals of Georgia. And so that's a pretty wide-open story that leaves a lot of room for conjecture and storytelling. But with this new opera about Anna Colquitt Hunter, there are not that many people around who knew Anna Colquitt Hunter, but there are plenty of people who knew Anna. And so it's been a little trickier, and I've even had a couple of people come up to me and go, well, you need to mention this or that, and I've made a few minor changes based on those suggestions.
You're not quite dealing with a living individual, but close to it.
But close. And I am certainly very impressed and attracted to Anna as a human being. She was obviously a force to be reckoned with in Savannah in those days. I think she should be regularly celebrated by Savannah. In fact, as I said at my program note to the show, is that I think they should name one of those little ferry boats after her.
That's certainly a good suggestion.
I think if Anna Hunter hadn't been around, I suppose somebody else probably would have taken the lead in the historic Savannah movement. But with her position as a newspaper reporter and her connections in the community, I think she was the ideal person to help make things happen back in that period of time.
Let's talk a little bit about Alice Riley.
Sure.
Now, Alice Riley, as you said, is a very elusive individual. Very little has been actually written, and one doesn't know how much is true and how much is legend. But you took that story and really created a truly remarkable individual. How did you go about coming up with the well-rounded Alice Riley that we see in the opera? Well,
one of the ways was thinking about her as an Irish indentured servant and what that life would have been like. And the first thing that actually came practically that I wrote was the fact that since part of the story that we do know is that Alice was pregnant and Alice did have a baby, and she was allowed to have the baby, and then a couple of weeks later they did hang her. But at some period of time, she must have sung a lullaby to her child. And so one of the ways into Alice's character was to find a lullaby. And I'm a little bit involved in the periphery of folk music. And so at that point in time, I started researching Irish lullabies, and I came upon this piece called the Bally Eamon Cradle Song. Found an Irish folk singer who knew something about it and thought that this was probably not a folk song that was around when Alice was around. It might be a little newer, but it certainly was something that could have worked. And also, she helped me do a Gaelic version of the Lord's Prayer, which is in Alice Riley, because Alice would be praying, and she was praying in Gaelic, and her English master didn't like it. So it's kind of this wonderful act of imagination making up a story. I mean, it's such fun that you kind of take the information that you have and then go, okay, well, where do I go from here? What can I do next? How can I spin this into a character? And the other thing is that a lot of the other people around her were completely made up. In any theatrical context, you can always understand that the hero needs a sidekick. Otherwise, the hero has nobody to talk to. And so we had to invent a minder for Alice named Mary so that Alice would have somebody to tell her story to. She's just somebody that we made up as a resident of the colony who was not necessarily an indentured servant herself, and somebody who was minding Alice because it was so early in the history of the colony that there wasn't a formal prison system set up, especially for women.
Tonight, we are talking with composer Michael Ching. The lullaby, which appears in Scene 7, if I'm not mistaken, is a gorgeous piece of music.
Thank you.
Did you derive some of that from the Irish lullabies?
I did. That piece of music is relatively similar to the version of it that you can find in folk music. It's got more of a rich harmonic texture to it than it would. In fact, most of the other versions that you hear are strictly a cappella. But that's definitely something that is a kind of found piece as opposed to 100% original piece.
Tonight on Contemporary Classics, we are talking with Michael Ching. When you write a piece like that, or any of the songs you write, because you write a lot of more what we'll call popular songs, do you think of what you want to say first? So does the lyric come first, or does the music come first?
Boy, it's the chicken or the egg question. I think everybody answers probably a little bit differently. If you understand the situation that the character is in, then you usually come up with some kind of key phrase, and then that key phrase usually dictates the rhythm. If it's, I am going to the store, that there's a rhythm to that. I am going to the store. You wouldn't say, I am going to the store, unless you, for some reason or other, wanted to emphasize that. So the rhythm of the language then all of a sudden inspires the music. And then it becomes a little bit like a ping-pong game between, on one side you have the music, and on the other side you have the lyrics, and you're kind of ping-ponging back and forth as you go. And particularly when you get stuck, you can sometimes get stuck on the music, and then you need to work on the lyrics, and hopefully the lyrics will inspire the music. And then sometimes if you get stuck on the lyrics, sometimes the imagined flow of a melody will force a lyric out of you. So that's certainly the way it works for me. And it's one of the reasons that I really enjoy doing the words and the music, because I find them so helpful to each other.
And it's really interesting in this lullaby because she's been in jail now for months during her pregnancy. You get that image from this and the previous scene of her weariness, what prison is actually doing to her. But there's also, of course, in the previous scene as well as this scene, there's a sense of hope. And
yes,
so
there's got to be a sense of hope in that show, because otherwise it's just so darn dark. I mean, why would a bunch of Savannah people want to come to a piece that turns Savannah into some place that was just mean and awful? And I don't think it was completely mean and awful, and I'm sure that there were people who were compassionate to Alice. And so she has this little thread of hope that maybe her son is going to grow up and things will be okay. I mean, in the historical record, I think the son actually died not too long after Alice, but Alice doesn't know that. And so at least Alice dies with a little bit of hope at the end of the opera, thinking that maybe her son is going to be okay and that Mary will take care of her. There was not really any possibility of writing something to go with Alice Riley that would be any darker. It's so sad that when it came time to do a follow-up opera, it just felt like, well, I need to do a comedy. And frankly, when you read all the books about Savannah ghost stories, most of them are not laughers. There's usually somebody done something bad and somebody done somebody wrong, and they don't turn out well for most of these ghosts. So, and I guess that's kind of why they're ghosts. That they were around to avenge something or to remind people of something that didn't go well.
You started with the fact that she has survived a voyage over, and I love the part of the libretto where it says, somebody refers to the monsters in the sea, and she says, of course, there's monsters on this boat as well.
Yeah, part of in my research, if you look up narratives that people wrote, diaries that they kept about those crossings, and those crossings were horrible. If they were lucky, they managed to get over without incident, and if they weren't lucky, like the Alice's ship was not lucky, they get becalmed, the food runs out, there's no water, the crew is preying on the passengers, and it's just an all-around horrific situation. Kind of reminds you of the refugees in the boats in the Mediterranean now. I mean, it sounds like these people had a lot of will and determination to get here, and that things must have been pretty bad where they were to make them want to take the risk of doing these crossings.
You touch on the sense of the refugees, which we see today, and you also touch on physical and perhaps sexual abuse of women, and which we see today. So this is an opera out of today's headlines.
Yeah. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Yeah. More things change, the more things stay the same.
Here is the first scene of the opera, Alice Riley.
When the sun shines so monsters on that ship, too.
Come down below with me, my girl. There we have water to drink. I know you're thirsty now, my girl. The crew has water to drink. Don't worry now, there's naught to fear. The boys will give you water clear and pure and sweet as a country spring. It's down below with me. Stay where you are, dearie, stay where you are. Don't let them take advantage of you. They'll sway you to silence, and if you tell the captain, some night when no one's looking, they'll throw you over the side. Take my word for it, he's not to be trusted. What's your name, girl?
Alice Riley.
Take my advice, Alice, keep below deck. And if you come up for air, cover your hair. A pretty girl is best not noticed by the sailors.
It all made me wish I had never left. A 7-week trip took 12. And then, when we saw land, it was not as we'd expected. It was not Philadelphia, but Savannah. The trees have beards, and I see oak trees like pictures of
You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
If you enjoy our programming on WRUU-LP, please support the station with a donation. As an individual, you can give any amount, become a basic station member, or become a serious fan of the station. To check out membership rates and to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Again, to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU-LP.
This portion of WRUU-LP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by a grant from Sentient Bean, offering fair trade coffee, vegan and vegetarian food, and breakfast all day. Located at 13 East Park Avenue, across the street from the tennis courts at Forsyth Park. Our menu and special events listings can be found at sentientbean.com. Welcome to Contemporary Classics. I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we are talking with composer Michael Ching. It's really interesting, too, in this day and age to have all of the various places which music can be found in terms of recorded music, but also SoundCloud, because you have quite a presence on SoundCloud as well.
Well, I use SoundCloud in many different kinds of ways. I have some private links on SoundCloud, so if people need to hear something that I'm working on, if a singer needs to learn a piece of mine that I'm working on, that I can use it that way. I'm also very well known for a piece called Speed Dating Tonight, which is a one-act opera about speed dating that's actually getting up to its 60th production this year, and that's only since 2013. And every time someone commissions a new piece for speed dating, I put it up there with my singing so that people can learn how that goes. SoundCloud and the finale for music notation. It's all rather technological right now, and I'm not as technological as your average pop musician, but I try to keep up as much as I can.
Well, speed dating, that's a good example because of the fact that it looks like you're adding dates.
Yes, exactly. My goal with that particular piece, and this is strange for an opera, the opera started out with enough material for 25 dates, and my goal is for there to be enough material for up to 100 dates. Now, the idea is not for us to have some kind of Götterdämmerung of an evening about speed dating where you do all 100 dates. The idea is that a particular producer can choose the pieces that they think work the best for them. For example, there's a place called Ouachita Baptist University in Arkansas that's doing a production of speed dating next month, and they probably didn't want the one about the guy. He's a marijuana scientist.
I got a degree in plant genetics. I'm here to be part of the cannabis industry. I know this is a date, not a job interview, but what I do might matter to you. There are two kinds of cannabis, sativa and indica. Sativa is stimulating, indica's relaxing. I'm studying strains in my lab with information from DNA sequencing. The industry's already huge, so there's no time to lose, no time to lose. It's a gold rush, another gold rush. Farmers at the head of the line, big tobacco is not far behind. It's a really exciting time. Maybe you could come by sometime and we could burn a few. I'm working on a new strain of Cambodian blue.
They didn't want probably particularly that one, but they were happy to have the duet about two Christian daters who meet at the speed dating events.
I'm an old-fashioned guy with old-fashioned ways. I want to come home at 5 o'clock and go to church Sundays. I want my kids to say, sir, yes, ma'am, and please. I'm not narrow-minded, but I'm feeling under siege. The world is changing under my feet. Every day I see things I don't want to see, and I'm praying for guidance, asking how to be. Don't you feel that way sometimes? Or is it just me? I was raised that way too. I know the world can seem coarse and cruel. People can be so mean and rude, but don't let them get to you. Find all the good that's all around, in your neighborhood and in your town. Don't let the news and politics blind you and get you down. The world is changing, that much is true, but the Lord will guide us through. We are tiny candles, that's all we are, but it's enough, it's just enough to fight back the dark. I'm an old-fashioned. I was raised that way too. With old-fashioned. The world can seem coarse and cruel. I wanna come home. People can be so mean and rude. Go to church, son. Get to you. I want my kids to find all the good that's all around in your neighborhood and in your town. I'm not narrow-minded, but I'm feeling under siege. The world is changing. That much is true. But every the Lord will guide us. I don't will guide us through. And I'm praying for guidance. Asking how we are. Don't you feel but it's enough? It's just enough to visit back the dark. What are you doing next week? What are you doing tomorrow night? What are you doing right after this? Yeah.
That way you have all these other kinds of things that people can pick and choose from. And as a matter of fact, for a production coming up in Delaware, they wanted something about the presidential election, so they're getting a piece about that as part of their speed dating selection.
I can only imagine the two parts of that date.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people fight over that sort of thing now, don't they?
They certainly do. And that's really very unique in the sense of opera, that you can customize the opera to your needs.
Yes, there really is nothing like it, and you kind of wonder why didn't somebody 150 years ago or 200 years ago think this up? But really, the production situations were different in that era, and frankly, you have a lot of college programs where you might have 15 or 20 singers who want to sing an opera, and how do you find some repertoire piece that works for all 15 or 20 of those? And so this is an ideal vehicle for that kind of situation, which I guess didn't really exist as much in the past.
Well, let's move on to the opera that is beginning at the end of the week, and that is Anna Hunter. So you jumped ahead from the very founding of Savannah to the preservation of Savannah.
Yes. I spent a lot of time in the Bull Street Library. There's a librarian there named Sharon who helped me with all the microfilms there, and I spent many days reading up about 1950s Savannah. And one of the things that was not a given at that period of time in the 40s and 50s is the vision of what Savannah should be like in, say, the year 2000 or the present day. There really were people who thought that the ideal city was more like Atlanta, that there needed to be a metropolis with skyscrapers, and the shopping mall was invented in the 1950s, and parking garages, apartment towers. They rounded off the corners of the square, which is something that you can still see today. They were called squares for a reason, and they rounded the corners off of them so the cars could get around them better. And so the whole historic Savannah vibe that we see today and that we benefit from today was really up in the air at that period of time. And I guess they had some good reasons for it to be up in the air, because I think a lot of the historic district was decrepit. It was not a place that most people wanted to live. They wanted to move out to the suburbs. Suburbs was a different definition than it is today. I think they're talking about Ardsley Park or someplace like that would barely be described as a suburb today, but that they wanted to move away from the center of the city. Anna Hunter, she had an apartment on the river. So she was one of those people that really believed in the historic district and managed to coalesce a bunch of people around her to save the Davenport House. And one of the things that happened, which was very important to me, was before the Davenport House, the historic preservation folks failed to save the Old City Market. And the Old City Market was a place that had become the African-American farmers' market. It was the place where they could go to sell their wares, and a lot of folks that are around still do remember a little bit about going down there to buy things in the 40s and 50s. One of the things that Alice Riley, the earlier opera, does not have in it, African-American characters, is they're just not really part of the Alice Riley story. Whereas in this story of Anna Hunter, if the city market hadn't been torn down, and it's possible that they wouldn't have managed to get the energy together to save the Davenport house. And so it gave me the opportunity to include an African-American character. Her name is Cortina, and she's selling her peas down at the old city market. And she's one of those people who's going to be out of a job. And in the research, the old farmer's market was way outside of the city at that period of time. And the only people who could use the farmer's market were people with cars. This lady and a lot of people like her couldn't afford cars. And so a lot of people were not just inconvenienced, but they were put out of work when the city market was torn down. Anna seemed to have been one of those people in that era who really crossed lines of color, race, and ethnicity, and she just went wherever she felt like it. So she was one of those people that could really feel what was happening in this situation. As far as the balance of the whole show for me, having an African-American character and being able to do something about the city market was very important to me in balancing out the feel of the whole show.
And I don't know if you had been to Savannah to see what replaced the city market. Probably one of the ugliest parking garages you could imagine.
Yes, very ugly parking garage.
Although now it's beautiful Ellis Square, and it's also a place for people to come together.
And that's what they could have done, but they didn't.
Yeah.
But at least they figured it out later.
When I saw about Anna Hunter and the premiere of Anna Hunter and the fact that it's going to be in the Davenport house, I thought, this is genius. Who came up with that idea?
Well, I think Maria and I talked it through as a possibility, and we approached Jamie Cradle, the director of the museum, and frankly, I think we were expecting a certain degree of suspicion and doubt about it, but Jamie really embraced the project, and she really viewed it as a way for history to come alive. So the premise of the opera, the way that Anna Hunter comes back and tells her story, is that there's a young tour guide named Louise, and Louise, at the very beginning of the opera, is trying to figure out what her angle is going to be on her tour of the Davenport house. She's working down in the gift shop, and if she gives a good tour, she'll be promoted to a tour guide. She can give the tours of the Davenport house, but if it doesn't go well, maybe they wouldn't let her be a tour guide. And so the pressure is on for her, and this is how the ghost of Anna Hunter, who is painting outside in the square, comes upon Louise at lunch hour and ends up telling her the story of the preservation of the Davenport house. And this becomes Louise's angle for her guide presentation at the Davenport house. When you go on the tours, because I went on 3 or 4 of them without even telling anybody what I was doing. I just signed up for them. And some people would talk about the family situation, and some people knew a whole lot about the interior design and the architecture, and everybody had a way of expressing their passion. And as Jamie so kindly put it, this is, in a sense, it's an opera about a young tour guide. A lot of the volunteers at the Davenport house are really their tour guides. Isn't everybody a tour guide in Savannah? Aren't you a tour guide, Dave? So I think the fact that the way she felt about it is this is an opera about us. This is about who we are today and how we've gotten to where we are. And so she and her staff have just been really wonderful and have embraced it. There's some minor downsides to doing an opera in an historic space, and mostly it's got to do with the size of the space. But, you know, when you go back to it and say chamber opera, and you basically can only fit 40 people or so in each performance, you know, the intimacy is really strong, and you just have a lot more performances than you would otherwise to get a reasonable amount of people the opportunity to see it.
And that's the one great thing about The Voice is that they'll do a premiere here in November, but often they'll repeat it again during their normal Voice series in August.
Yes, well, they were kind enough to repeat Alice, and so I hope they'll repeat Anna, too, sometime.
Tonight, we are talking with composer Michael Ching. It's interesting to see the number of people who actually have seen Alice, and I'm including myself as part of that, several times.
Yeah, well, that's great. You gave me a good suggestion that I'm still working on to this day. I need to get your beach into the show. I just haven't come up with the lyric for it yet. But one of these days I'm going to fix that.
Well, that could be a separate song.
Or, yeah, it could be a separate song. Anyway, the idea for most of the performances of Anna Hunter is that it's actually going to start in the back courtyard, and we're going to use the back courtyard instead of Columbia Square itself. A group of recreational motorcyclists decided to drive by while the opera was going on. It was worried to have acoustical problems and that sort of thing, some permitting issues, and so it was just easier to start the opera in the backyard of the Davenport House. And then it's going to move into the gift shops, because Anna Hunter is going to actually go into the gift shop and ooh and ah over all the things that she sees in the gift shop. What are those sparkling silvery things? Are they coasters? Oh, they're CDs, but there weren't CDs around in those days. Things like that. And then it's going to go up into the main parlor of the house for the rest of the opera.
So will the audience then be standing and follow you?
The audience will sit in the courtyard, they will stand in the gift shop, and then they will sit in the parlor.
Okay.
There is also one performance, we wanted to make sure that it was accessible, and so there's going to be one performance that's completely done in the Kennedy Pharmacy.
Mm-hmm. Which is up on Broughton Street.
Yeah. Behind the Davenport House.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to climb those stairs at the Davenport House, because there is one stairway that you'd have to climb, then there is an accessible performance.
Tonight on Contemporary Classics, we are talking with Michael Ching. I had heard rumors that this may be a trilogy.
Well, actually, we think that these two pieces are enough. We originally thought about this as being a trilogy, but these are both substantial pieces, and I think that one's named Alice and one's named Anna. I think Alice and Anna is a great title for the whole project. Hopefully, Savannah Voice Festival will eventually do them both together.
But see, I'm still seeing Il Tritico here.
Well, back in those days, I think the entertainment derriere was a little bit more patient than it is now.
And it's interesting, too, because when they did Il Tritico as part of the Savannah Music Festival, I believe they did.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. But they didn't do all three of them.
They did two, right.
Two. Yeah.
So there's precedent for doing two.
Only the largest opera companies ever put on all three acts of the Tritico. Most people just put on two of them if they put it on. I have a piece that's up until speed dating been my most popular piece called Buozo's Ghost, and it is a sequel to Johnny Schicchi. So you would just do the third act of the Tritico, and then you would do my sequel, Buozo's Ghost. And there are 3 places that are doing it this year, and I'm going to be conducting that up in Delaware, at Opera Delaware this spring.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your popular music as well, your songs.
Yeah. I lived in Memphis for 18 years, and Nashville was just down the road, 3 hours, and my wife, Barbara, is actually a big scholar of country music. Has written a couple of books about it. So country music has been part of my life for a good long time. And even before that, I grew up in the 60s and enjoyed some folk music during that era. And so when I started writing music and lyrics, it was only natural that I do a little bit of it as a songwriter. I signed up for a workshop that involved going down to Nashville every week and be part of a seminar. And just because of who I was and what I was involved either as a conductor and or commissioner of a couple of projects by some pretty powerful, well-known Nashville songwriters, Mike Reed and Marcus Hummon. And so I've gotten a chance to hang around and be evaluated by a lot of really good writers. And Hugh Moffat, who is one of the people that I do write operas with, and as a librettist, he's had songs recorded by Dolly Parton in Alabama, and one of his classic songs, Old Flames Can't Hold a Candle to You, is actually on Kesha's latest album. So he's all of a sudden gotten back into the forefront of something again. Even though I don't have a lot to show for it in terms of cuts or track record and that sort of thing, it really taught me a lot about writing lyrics. And I'm not afraid to write lyrics anymore. I've gotten to the point where I think my lyrics are serviceable or even good for opera. And so it's been very good for me as an opera composer. And I guess my definition of opera, if somebody asks me what my favorite opera is, if it's not Carmen, it's Porgy and Bess. And Gershwin, of course, was a songwriter who also had a lot of classical music chops. And to me, that blend of being able to write something as beautiful and tuneful as Summertime and something as complicated and turbulent as the hurricane scene, that's the best of both worlds. And so that's kind of where I'd like my opera to be in terms of my own work.
Do you have any of these songs like on SoundCloud or someplace where people can access them?
Yeah, there's a couple of them on SoundCloud. There's a goofy little music video of one of them called My Lazy Ass Has Trumped My OCD. That's actually findable on YouTube.
My lazy ass has trumped my OCD. My get it done's been swamped by let it be. Today this comfy couch will be my destiny. 'Cause today my lazy ass has trumped my OCD. Down with caffeine and up with alcohol. I will turn off the phone and not check it at all. Although it would be wise, I will not exercise today, because my lazy ass has trumped my OCD. Now please don't say, you know you're pissing your life away. Sometimes it is my dream just to let it stream. I'll get some inspiration from my staycation, and tomorrow I'll be on my way. But today my lazy ass has trumped my OCD. Admit it, even the most workaholic amongst you has sometimes felt this way. Life has its highs and lows, its fasts and slows, its lulls, nulls and dulls. And just as sometimes you are dealt the ace of hearts, sometimes all you get is the three of clubs. So, club that guilty feeling and let your lazy ass trump your OCD. Now everybody! My lazy ass has trumped my OCD. My get it done has been swamped by let it be. Today this comfy couch will be my destiny. 'Cause today my lazy ass has trumped my OCD. My lazy ass has trumped my OCD.
And then there's a couple of things on the SoundCloud side as well.
Like an old Stephen Foster song played upon the piano, or an old faded photograph torn and creased and yellow. I will come to you that way, a distant memory, like a lightning flash across the sky. Love will light the night, like the flight of a hummingbird, gone within an instant, or the sight of a cool mirage floating in the distance. I will come to you that way, so close and yet so far, like a comet's tail or a falling star. Love will light the night. For just a moment I'll be there, and I'll take you in my arms, and hand in hand and heart to heart, we'll never be apart. Like the face of a movie star from the silent era, or the memory of a kiss felt down to the marrow. I will come to you that way, so come and yet so gone. Why'd I let you go? How did we go wrong? Will light the night. Maybe love will light the night. Maybe love will light the night. Maybe love will light the night.
And one of these days I feel like I'd like to get around to cutting a little folk solo album, but haven't done that yet. We should talk about that whole scene sometime, because I'd love to, when I'm there, maybe in August, find a place to play.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Because people don't think necessarily of an opera composer as being a songwriter.
Right, and I think people think of opera composing as a very highbrow activity, and I suppose it is for some people, but to me, it's words and music, plain and simple, and that's what I love.
And I hate to sound like I'm perseverating on speed dating, but that is really what I think of as a series of songs.
Yeah. I don't think it's a secret. They're planning on doing speed dating next year, so I'll be down for that in the summertime.
It's been really wonderful having a chance to talk with you, and I hope I catch you at some point to touch base.
Yeah, I'm coming to Savannah.
Tonight we have been talking with Michael Ching about his opera Alice Riley and about the new opera that will be premiered later this week, Anna Hunter. I want to thank you so very much